Have you ever sat in a quiet room and felt like the silence was louder than anything you'd ever heard? Not because the house was noisy, but because your thoughts were. Maybe you looked at your phone and realized it's been days since your kids called. Or maybe you stood at your window with a hot cup of coffee and thought, when did I stop being seen? It's not just about loneliness. It's deeper than that. It's about this ache we carry when we've spent a lifetime giving our time, our love, our energy, and now, when we're finally ready to receive, the room is empty. If that feeling speaks to you, I want you to know something right now. You are not alone. And more importantly, this isn't the end of your story. Not by a long shot. Today, I want to talk to you heart to heart. Not with shallow comforts or feel-good slogans, but with truth. Because at this point in life, you don't need noise. You need peace. You need self-respect. And sometimes the only way to find those things again is to let go of everything that no longer feeds your soul. So let's begin. What does it actually mean to live with peace and dignity after 60? And how can an old way of thinking possibly help? You'd be surprised. It's not about shutting off your emotions or pretending nothing hurts. It's about learning how to stand tall even when things fall apart. It's about understanding what you can control and what you can finally let go of. The first lesson is this: stop begging for love. I know that's a hard thing to hear, especially when the love you're missing is from your own children. But the truth is, the more we reach out with trembling hands, hoping someone will notice, the more we end up breaking our own hearts. There's something deeply painful about sending that good morning text, waiting, checking, and then watching hours pass in silence. I remember hearing from a woman named Margaret. She's 72, lives in Arizona, and told me that every morning, without fail, she sends a message to her 3 grown children. And most days, she gets nothing. Maybe a heart emoji now and then. Maybe "thanks, Mom" once a week. But often, nothing at all. And when I asked her why she kept doing it, she said something that stayed with me. "I'm afraid that if one day I don't, they won't even notice I'm gone." That broke me. Because that isn't love. That's fear. And it's a fear too many carry in silence. Love should be given freely, but it should also be received freely. When it becomes a transaction, when your affection becomes a test that's never passed, it's no longer love. It's anxiety dressed up as devotion. You deserve better. You've earned better. Now, I'm not saying to cut people off or to stop caring, but I am saying this: your dignity is more important than a reply that never comes. Your self-worth is not tied to how often someone calls you. You are not a leftover. You are not a burden. You are a whole, valuable, vibrant human being, and you deserve to be treated like one. The next lesson builds right on top of that. Stop defining yourself by what you give. This one's tough, especially for those of us who've spent decades being the glue that holds everything together. You've raised children, supported spouses, worked hard, cooked meals, cleaned up messes, often without a single thank you. Somewhere along the way, being useful became your identity. But now that they don't need you like they used to, what's left? That's the dangerous part. When your sense of purpose is tied entirely to being needed, the moment they don't need you anymore, you feel like you're fading. Like a shadow of the person you once were. I've met people who, even in retirement, still give their time, their energy, their money, just to stay connected. Just to matter. Walter, a 76-year-old gentleman I met in Ohio, told me he sends part of his monthly pension to his kids. Not because they need it, but because he's afraid they'll forget him if he stops. Even if they call just to ask for money, he said, at least they're calling. His eyes dropped when he said that, and in that moment, I saw what many of us feel but rarely admit. That's not generosity. That's emotional survival. Here's the truth you may need to hear today. You were not born just to give until there's nothing left. You are more than what you provide. You matter even when you're not fixing anyone's problems. You're not a service. You're a soul. and no one thanks a service. They just expect it. But a soul? A soul deserves to be seen. That shift, recognizing your own value not because of what you give, but because of who you are, is powerful. It allows you to say no without guilt, to rest without apologizing, to spend time on things that light you up instead of always tending to others' fires. This is your time now, not just to survive, but to rediscover the person you may have put on hold for decades. I want you to picture something. Imagine your heart is a home. For years you kept the door wide open. Your children walked in and out, ate at your table, left their laundry on your chairs, took what they needed. You never asked for a key in return. You just gave. But now, when you knock on their door, sometimes they don't answer. So what do? Keep standing there in the rain, waiting? Or do you walk back to your own home, sweep the floor, light the fireplace, and start decorating your space again, for you? That's what these lessons are about. Not turning bitter, not giving up. But choosing to stop waiting in the cold when the warmth you seek can come from within. And the moment you decide that your peace matters just as much as anyone else's comfort, that's when things begin to shift. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to announce it with fireworks. Quiet changes are often the most powerful. Just like the sun doesn't need permission to rise, you don't need permission to reclaim your peace. And if any part of you is whispering right now, "But what if they finally come around?" Then let me say this gently. Let them. Let them come if they do. Let the door be open. But never again at the cost of your self-respect. Because you deserve more than scraps of affection. You deserve the feast of your own love. Let's take a breath together. You're still here. You're still standing. And the beautiful part is, you're just getting started. There's something deeply freeing about realizing that you no longer have to prove your worth to anyone. When that quiet understanding starts to settle into your bones, you begin to see things differently, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You start to notice how much energy you've spent waiting for something as simple as acknowledgement, a returned call, a kind word, a sense that someone sees you. But here's the next truth I want to share with you, and I say this as gently as I can. Not every distance between people is meant to be closed. Sometimes the space that's grown between you and the ones you love isn't your fault. It's simply life. And accepting that emotional distance without guilt is one of the most important steps toward peace. No one ever teaches us how to let go with love. We're taught to hold on, to keep trying, to believe that if we just do more, give more, wait longer, things will go back to the way they were. But what if they don't? What if your children don't return the calls? What if they keep living their lives without looking back? It's not easy to accept that. It's even harder not to take it personally. But there's something powerful to remember. Reality doesn't bend just because we wish it would. And while you may not be able to control someone else's actions, you can control how you respond. You can meet distance with dignity. You can stop seeing silence as rejection and start seeing it as a space where your own healing can happen. I once met a woman named Helen at a reflection group in Michigan. She was 69 and carried a quiet wisdom with her. Every time one of her children started pulling away, missing a birthday, not replying to a message, she'd write them a letter. Not to send, but to feel. She'd pour out every emotion, every word she wanted to say, and when she was finished, she'd fold the paper, place it in a box, and whisper, "Thank you." Not because it felt good, but because it meant she could still feel. She told me, "Accepting that they're not who they used to be hurt me, but it set me free." Let that sink in. You don't have to harden your heart to move on. You just have to stop tying your happiness to someone else's behavior. When you accept that the love you give may not always be returned the way you expect, you also open yourself up to a quieter, more enduring kind of peace. That brings us to something that may be the hardest truth yet. It's the part no one really prepares us for. building a fulfilling life without waiting for recognition. For decades, you've shown up. You've worked. You've sacrificed. You've poured love and effort into the people you care about. And deep down, maybe you thought that one day, someone would say it. Really say it. Thank you. I see you. I appreciate what you did. But what happens when that moment never comes? When the gratitude you hoped for is silent or late or never? This is where many people break without realizing it. They keep going through the motions, but inside they feel hollow. It's like something is missing, and they can't quite name it. They replay the past, wondering what more they could have done. They start to question their value, their choices, their entire story. But let me offer you a different lens. What if you don't need their applause to validate your worth? What if the very fact that you gave from a place of love, without needing anything in return, is enough? Someone once said, "Whoever expects external rewards to justify their virtue is not yet free." In other words, your goodness, your sacrifice, your love, none of it needs to be seen to be real. It's real because you lived it. You gave it. You embodied it. Imagine what your life might look like if you stopped waiting for recognition and started recognizing yourself. What if you joined that painting class you've always been curious about? What if you finally started writing down the stories you've held inside for decades, not to publish, but because your voice matters? What if you walked through each day asking, "What fills me up?" instead of, "Who still needs something from me?" I've met people who made that shift. People who, after a lifetime of living for others, finally turned inward and discovered a world they had forgotten existed. Some began volunteering in their communities, not because they were bored, but because they had something left to give, and this time, it was on their terms. Others picked up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, even learned to play music or dance again, not for show, but for joy. And you know what happened? They stopped waiting for someone else to make them feel alive. They started becoming the source of their own fulfillment. You can do the same. You don't need permission. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need one small step in the direction of your own light. That light doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours. A walk in the park without checking your phone, an afternoon spent journaling, a quiet evening watching the sky change colors. These aren't trivial things. They're sacred, because they remind you that you are still here, you are still whole, and you still have time, not to chase, but to create. And yes, it may sting a little to realize that the people you poured your life into aren't clapping for you now. But maybe, just maybe, the silence is your invitation to start clapping for yourself. The journey toward peace and self-respect isn't about being alone. It's about being aligned with what matters, with who you are, and with how you want to spend the time you have left. Not waiting, not begging, but living. You've already given so much. Now is the time to give back, to yourself. Sometimes we don't even realize how much we've been carrying until we set it down. The emotional weight, the worry, the questions that echo in the quiet moments of the day. Did I do enough? Why don't they call? What if I mattered less than I thought? These thoughts don't just visit. They linger. And if we're not careful, they start to shape the way we see ourselves. But what if the pain you've been holding isn't something to hide from? What if it's trying to teach you something powerful? That's the next lesson on this journey. Not just to live with pain, but to transform it. Not into resentment or bitterness, but into wisdom, into a legacy. The truth is, pain doesn't disappear on its own. It needs movement. It needs light. And if we keep replaying the past like an old movie, hoping the ending will change, we only rob ourselves of the present. You've waited long enough. You've stayed silent long enough. Now maybe it's time to ask, what will I do with this pain? Because the pain is real. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to feel it. It's even okay to cry about it. But what's not okay, what steals your peace, is letting that pain define who you are. You are not a victim of silence. You are not just a parent who got left behind. You are someone who has lived and lost and loved and still has something to offer. They say the wound is the place where the light enters. What does that mean for you? It means that the very thing you think has broken you might be the very thing that opens you up to a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't depend on whether your phone rings or whether someone finally says, "You were right. You mattered. You already matter." And your story, your real story, isn't over yet. I've met men and women who reached this point and made a choice. A brave one. They stopped waiting for validation and started turning their experiences into meaning. They began mentoring younger people, writing memoirs, sharing lessons that only someone who's lived through storms can truly understand. They turned their quiet suffering into quiet strength. There was one man I remember. His name was Richard. Widowed, estranged from two of his kids, retired early. For a long time he felt lost. Until one day, he walked into a local library and asked if they needed volunteers. They did. He ended up starting a reading circle for other seniors. What began as a way to pass time turned into something deeper. He said, "I thought I needed to be needed. Turns out I just needed to feel useful again, for myself." That's the difference. When you stop measuring your value by how others respond and start anchoring it in your own choices, the world changes shape. It doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you're no longer ruled by it. You become the author of the next chapter, not the supporting character in someone else's story. That's the real kind of freedom, not freedom from hardship, but freedom within it. The ability to stand in the middle of the storm and still say, "This is my life, and I will live it with dignity." Some people might say, "But that sounds lonely." And I understand. It's natural to crave connection. We're human. We're wired to want to be loved. But there's a difference between wanting love and needing it to survive. The first opens your heart. The second chains it shut. What if you could live in a way where love, when it comes, is a gift, not a requirement? What if every time your child calls, it's a joy, not a lifeline? That's not loneliness. That's emotional independence. And it's one of the most liberating things you can give yourself. You're not erasing the past by moving forward. You're honoring it by not letting it hold you hostage. Every step you take now, every choice to speak kindly to yourself, to pursue what brings you peace, to stop explaining yourself to people who never really listened, those are steps toward reclaiming your life. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. There will be days when you ache, when you hear a song or smell something familiar and the memories rush in. And that's okay. Let them come. Let them remind you of everything you've lived through. But don't let them trick you into thinking that your best days are behind you. They're not. Your best days are the ones where you decide to live, not for approval, not for applause, but for yourself. When you wake up and choose to drink your coffee slowly. When you take a walk simply because the air feels good. When you finally say no to something that drains you and yes to something that fills you up. That's how peace returns. Not all at once, but moment by moment, choice by choice. And as it grows, so does your self-respect. Not because someone handed it to you, but because you built it, brick by brick, from everything you survived. So if you're still here, listening, watching, breathing through this with me, I want you to know something. You're doing something remarkable. You're choosing to look at yourself not through the eyes of those who forgot you, but through the eyes of someone who finally sees the truth. The truth that you are enough, that you have always been enough. Let that truth settle in. Let it soften the places that have been hardened by years of waiting. Let it guide your next step, your next breath, your next quiet act of self-love. And if this message has stirred something inside you, If a part of you feels lighter, more awake, then write it down somewhere, on paper, in the comments below, or just whisper it to yourself. I choose to live with dignity. Because sometimes saying it out loud is the first step toward finally believing it. You've waited long enough for someone else to lift you up. Now it's your turn. Living with dignity doesn't mean you never feel sadness again. It doesn't mean you stop loving the people who've drifted away or suddenly forget the years you gave to others. No, dignity means loving fully, without losing yourself in the process. It means understanding that your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else stopped seeing it. That's the beautiful power of this stage in life. You've already walked through fire. You've already carried others. You've loved, hurt, forgiven, and endured more than most people will ever know. So now, you get to ask a different question. What do I need now? Maybe what you need is rest. Maybe it's a new adventure. Maybe it's something as simple as sitting by a window with a cup of tea and letting the quiet feel like peace instead of loneliness. Or maybe it's sharing your story, not because you're hoping for a reaction, but because your truth deserves to be heard. So many people reach this chapter believing that the best parts of life are behind them. That now, it's just about waiting. Waiting for visits, for holidays, for something or someone to make it all feel full again. But here's what I believe, and I hope you'll hear it with your heart. The fullness you're looking for doesn't come from the outside. It's already within you. It's been waiting for you to stop chasing and start remembering. You don't need to become someone new. You just need to return to who you've always been when no one was asking you to prove yourself. When you laughed just because the sky was blue. When you believed your time was valuable. When you looked in the mirror and didn't see forgotten or left behind, but saw someone still alive, still glowing, still worthy. I know life hasn't always been fair. I know that sometimes the people you've loved the most have hurt you the deepest. I know you've been strong when you were tired, kind when you were hurting, and silent when you should have been comforted. But all of that doesn't make you weak. That makes you resilient. That makes you wise. And it means you have something incredibly precious, the ability to begin again. Not with noise or drama, but with calm. With quiet decisions that say, I matter. My time matters. My peace matters. You start waking up for yourself. You cook meals that nourish you. You choose your clothes with care not because anyone is watching, but because you are. You start walking taller, not because you've been praised, but because you've stopped shrinking. And when the phone doesn't ring, you don't collapse into disappointment. You light a candle, turn on music you love, and remind yourself that joy is not something anyone else has to deliver to you. You can create it. You already have. That's the legacy I hope you choose. Not the legacy of suffering in silence, but of rising in your own time, in your own way. Your children may never fully understand the depth of your sacrifices. They may never say the words you waited for. But even if they don't, you will have done something extraordinary. You will have loved without turning bitter, and lived without begging to be seen. That's rare, and it's powerful. You don't need to shut your heart to protect it. You just need to be more intentional with where it opens. If someone steps toward you with kindness, meet them there. If someone walks away, let them go without chasing. And most of all, don't abandon yourself just because someone else did. Every day is a chance to show up for your own life. Even the quiet days. Even the lonely ones. Even the ones that ask you to sit still and listen to the deeper parts of who you are. That's not wasted time. That's soul work. That's where peace begins, not in what you achieve, not in what you give, but in how gently you begin treating yourself. And maybe someone you love will notice. Maybe they won't. But either way, you'll no longer be living in the waiting room of someone else's affection. You'll be living in your own home, your heart, your mind, your beautiful, weathered spirit, decorated with self-respect. That's how we age well. Not by clinging, not by shrinking, but by expanding into the freedom we earned through decades of loving and giving and hoping. So if you're still here with me, if these words have reached something inside you, I want you to take one last deep breath. Let it in. Let it fill the parts of you that felt forgotten. Let it remind you, you are not invisible. You are not too late. You are not broken. You are becoming. And if this message stirred something in your heart, please share your voice in the comments. Let me know what country you're watching from. And if you feel called to, write these words. I choose to live with dignity. Let that be your promise to yourself, your bold, quiet revolution. If this video meant something to you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you'd like to walk this journey of healing and strength with a community that understands, subscribe. Because around here, we don't sugarcoat. We grow. Together. You deserve a life of peace. A life of meaning. A life that begins and ends with respect. From others, yes, but most importantly, from yourself. Here's to you. To your courage. To your calm. To the beautiful, unstoppable life that's still ahead of you. Thank you for being here. I'll see you again soon. Until then, remember, the love you don't beg for is the only love that truly sets you free.